To reflect on the life and times of Dr. Peter Magubane, we are now joined by his granddaughter Ulungile Magubane. Very good evening to you. And before we start, just to extend, of course, our condolences from myself and the SABC. A warm welcome to you.
Hi there, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. All right, let's talk about your grandfather. I mean, I think for the rest of us, as South Africans, we know him as this, internationally renowned and acclaimed photographer whose images will no doubt remain in many of our minds. To you, his grandfather, Ubamkhulu, talk to us about that and about his, his personal life and who he was really as a person, and perhaps some of your fondest memories of him.
Thanks for having me. It's interesting, I didn't realize he was this huge person until I was in about grade 5 or so. We had like a book show and tell at school. And I found his June 16 book. And obviously now I'm coming into like research and stuff at that age. So I asked my mom, I said, oh, is this Opa? We call him Opa.
Okay.
Is this Opa's book? And she said, yes. That's your grandfather's book. So I said, oh, so, is he a writer or whatever? And she explained to me that he's a big photographer, and then I looked through all these pictures that I had obviously iconically seen. And also learning history in school, and had no idea that those were my grandfather's photographs. So I think that's kind of where my curiosity for him as a photographer began.
Yeah, we've been talking a lot about the passing of the late Mbongeni Ngema, and it's kind of ironic that they would pass away almost at the same time. Both people who really showcased what apartheid was and the realities of how dreadful the times of apartheid were. One as a playwright, as in the arts, and one, of course, as a journalist, as a photographer. I wonder, when you look at some of his work, what are your thoughts in terms of the past and that role, that pivotal role, that he and people like Mbongeni Ngema have played, in South Africa, and the fact that they really showed what apartheid was, and I'm sure the apartheid government would have wished for some of what they portrayed and what they showed to not exist in history books. So, the importance of their sort of work.
I think in any kind of Black or African culture, storytelling has always been at the center. Yeah. Obviously, my grandfather was a visual artist, and the saying obviously goes that seeing is believing. And I think that any kind of propaganda that was out there to make apartheid seem any less of an atrocity than it was, his photographs and the sacrifices that many other photojournalists like him made to make those photographs. The freedom we enjoy today, that I am allowed to express myself as a young South African Black woman who is an artist, and have been able to choose that vocation for myself, knowing that there was a time where Black people were pretty much, groomed to be appendages to white society in our own land. So as I've come to become an adult, I really, looking at his photographs and his work, have taken in the fact that a lot of sacrifices were made for me to be the person that I am today. Yeah. And I guess on a smaller, more personal scale, that I had the example of an artist and someone who chose that vocation, whether it was difficult or not.
Yeah. When we speak to artists, who've passed away, or people in the media, or journalists who've passed away, a lot of their family or friends, when they talk about them, they bemoan and lament the fact that they believe that, generally people are only recognized upon the news of their passing. Would that be true in the case of your grandfather? I'm sitting here with a list of some of his awards and achievements. I mean, just to name a few that I'm looking at here, the Martin Luther King Award, Lifetime Achievement Award for the Mother Jones Foundation, first Black South African to win a photographic prize in the country. He won the Nat Nakasa Award for Media Integrity, honorary doctorates that he's had, the degree from Columbia College, honorary fellowship from the Royal Photographic Society, Party, a Doctor of Law, Rhodes University. I mean, the list goes on. I can't even finish it. Speaking to you here. So I wonder if you would agree then with that sentiment that, it's only when people have passed that we start to kind of recognize them and respect them and show, our adoration.
Well, I guess in my grandfather's case, that really isn't the case. He's a very decorated photographer. I think, though, that a lot of those recognitions and reverence had come from an outside, obviously, because a lot of the work that he was making was being sent out to parties around the world that could help change the situation in South Africa. And for him, it was more important that he was seen and his work was seen by his own people, which I think was kind of remedied in these last years. In fact, 2023 was a very big year. We spent the most of the year honoring his achievements, his honorary doctorates, all of those things. Obviously, he was in ill health, so he couldn't attend most of it. So I wouldn't say it is true for my grandfather, but I would say on a larger scale that there is a bit of a lack of, I wouldn't even say recognition in like a vain way. Just trying to make it clear or to revere artists in ways that they are revered in, let's say, the Western world. A lot of Europe and America's, the crux of their culture is preserved in the work that artists make, because artists reflect the times that they live in. So I think that more that recognize the work that South African artists do in their own countries, because we are celebrated elsewhere before we are seen at home.
I was wondering to myself if perhaps you have stories that we might not have. I was reading where he said that, during the time that there were, photographers, you weren't really allowed to hold cameras and take photos, during police activity, just in case you actually stumble upon some of these images that we later saw. So he says, he said that he often would hide his camera in really strange ways. So one of the things that I read is that he would hide it inside a Bible. And there was one story which I thought was quite humorous, in fact, and maybe it also speaks to who he was. Perhaps he was very funny, but there is a story where he talks about carrying a camera inside a loaf of bread, and he hollowed out that loaf of bread. And these are some of the stories that you pick up when you read up on him. I mean, maybe there's some that you perhaps know of that we don't know of, but I thought that was really quite funny. He's saying, in this particular case where he had the loaf of bread, he was biting this bread to look like he's eating, so that he doesn't raise any sort of suspicion. And maybe you could share with us, some of the stories that perhaps he might have shared with you and the family that we might not have access to.
My grandfather was a very, he had a lot of character. So I'm not surprised, and that's one of his favorite stories to tell, and even when I think about it, I'm just like, how does somebody even think to empty out a loaf of bread to put a camera in there? He used to do it the same thing with milk cartons, so he would look like he was having lunch. But there was a story my mom told about, I think it was during the times of the riots in Soweto in 76, that she was walking in the streets with her friend, and she saw this kind of old derelict looking man that the police were kind of harassing, and she kept saying to her friend, like, I don't know, I feel like that's my father. And her friend was just like, no, that's like an old homeless man, She's like, no, those are his shoes. Like, I know my dad's shoes. And as they were kind of harassing him and taking off the thing, she realized, like, oh, my father's actually in a disguise right now. And as they were kind of taking away the robes and things, she was like, you see, it's my dad. And she couldn't say anything, obviously, because she didn't want to give him away. But he used to do all kinds of things like that. He used to love making, his favorite thing to make was baby chicken and couscous. He learned to make this by a Moroccan recipe. So every time we went to his house, he was cooking us baby chicken and couscous. He had a lot of character outside of him being obviously an anti-apartheid stalwart. He was also a very dashing man, a ladies' man, He was married 3 times. And I'm close to all of my grannies. So, right till the end, when he stopped being able to speak, he was telling jokes. And the one thing we used to really love doing together was sitting in the sun, that kind of 3 or 4 o'clock sun where the sun is going away. I think that's some of the stuff I'll miss the most.
All right. Well, we certainly do appreciate you sharing some of those stories with us. And again, condolences to your stories remind me so much of my own grandmother, and it's always so sad to lose. I lost my grandmother this year, so I definitely do relate. And again, I pass my condolences to you, and we feel it from, on my case anyway, I feel it from a deep place. So I hope that indeed you and your family will find comfort in some of those beautiful memories that you've shared with us. Thank you so much. Right.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
You're most welcome. That is Ulungile Magubane, the granddaughter of the late Dr. Peter Magubane.